John Mack has been a pioneer and an explorer in many subjects for a long, long time. And he's always been very thoughtfully and carefully, but determinedly out in front on issues that are often unpopular and not well understood. And he has a lot of courage and a lot of compassion in that way. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. John Mack.
Reich came to my attention, well, I was always interested in Freud as a young person, but the power of Reich came to me through friends of mine, Marin Sheriff in particular, and others in Boston when I was a medical student. Before that, that started in the early 50s, and I met Marin in 56, and Reich represented kind of taking sort of, let's get on with Freud in a more, like direct way. Let's break down the character armor. Let's really get liberated here. Let's blow off the inhibitions. Let's, of course, that isn't what Reich was really saying, but we misinterpreted Reich as being the kind of, let's get down. Let's really go for it. Take off the lid. Get into our bodies. That there was a lot to that. But also, to me, Reich represented the willingness to extend the whole psychoanalytic edifice into much more direct experiential dimensions. Ultimately, I think into spiritual elements at the end of his life, but I wasn't familiar with that. And yet, Reich was my, in a way, introduction into the things that were the transformative elements. The psychoanalytic structure really was within the biomedical establishment. It put the onus on the individual, almost entirely the psychic structures of the person. You analyze the defenses, you then liberate your feelings, your sexuality, your aggression, you look at it, you readapt it, but it's about yourself. It's not about taking on the whole pathogenic structure of the culture and society in which you're living, which Reich was really about, and which I think alienated him from the psychoanalytic establishment and led him to be thrown out of that and persecuted. What happened to me was I ventured into transformational modalities such as, through my son, such as transcendental meditation, EST. Then I worked, at one time there was a EST-related workshop that had to do with the body and freedom of the body. And another son of mine was involved in that, and the leader said, "Why don't you tell your dad about this body workshop we're having?" And my son said, "I don't know if that'll work. My dad doesn't have a body." This gives you some idea of how it was perceived in my intimate offspring. So anyway, through EST-related, Werner Erhard is now in disrepute because the establishment decided to discredit him, as it did with Reich, and again, the seeds of that were in some ways within Werner's own personality. But what he did represent was the challenging of fundamental structures by which we control ourselves and which limit our power and vitality, the ability to love. And through that whole opening that brought about, I ended up working with Stan Grof and the holotropic breath work, and through the breath work and its energy-releasing, body-oriented, spiritually oriented power, through the openings there, I often kiddingly say the UFOs kind of found an opening and flew in. And then through that I met Bud Hopkins, and one of the people that was in my Grof training group, who brought me to see Bud had a case, and then I began to see these cases. And what happened to me in relation to the abduction work, and this is, I just realized this today, it links it, is the phenomenon that above all, the abduction work has created for me, and I can't talk about it here because that's not what this is about, but is the energy involved. Is what you need to do in the abduction work, as in the Groff work, is hold incredibly powerful energies. The abductee will say, as they relive the experience of the contact with the alien beings, whatever they may be, they'll say things like, every cell in my body is vibrating. It's like the whole body system is just like completely holding in the cells this incredible energy. It's as if these aliens or whatever this is are pitched at a different energy level, and the person who works with them has to be able to hold that energy. It's not like talking about something. It's like being totally engaged. It's that engagement with people that I think has made this work so vital, and I think is also related to what we're talking about here, this energy that Reich identified and tried to measure. Now, next point is, what is this resistance when that someone like Reich runs up against? And I'm not going to try to answer that except to try to deepen the question. I think of Reich as a Promethean character, or somebody who treads into the infrastructure of being, breaks into, gives fire to mankind, liberates, and then pays forever by having the birds eat at his liver. You know, he is that. And what is that? What is that about? I haven't, you know, what is it to liberate people? That's what he was about. What is it to liberate us? What is liberation, really? It's much more than having orgasms. There's something much that's part of it, but you know, I think we have to go much further than that. Now, my own experience. What happened to me? I as the president of Harvard's lawyers said, what do you think the dean of the medical school will think when he sees one of his professors going on Oprah Winfrey saying that little green men are abducting men, women, and children? That sort of summed it up. First of all, I did go on Oprah Winfrey, but
Dr. Mack, coming from Harvard, what do you think this all means?
When I first heard about this, I thought this must be madness. But when I heard that hundreds of thousands of people, if these are real experiences, what is going on? What's the source of these experiences? That's an interesting
that's the question. What's going on?
I never said anything about little green men, and I doubt that the dean ever watches Oprah Winfrey. But it captured my struggle with Harvard, which was that I was implying that there was another intelligence in the cosmos that other than the professors at Harvard Medical School, and that intelligence had somehow found a way to reach us, and what's more, was doing things that you could document in one way or another. And they ostensibly were saying I hadn't documented it well enough. I don't think that's really the problem. I think the problem was that I was making this claim of a cosmic relationship with another intelligence, and we rid ourselves of other intelligences about 300 years ago and gave all that over to the church. The scientific establishment is supposed to stay strictly with the material world, and that deal of keeping that separation is violated by the abduction phenomenon, and my crime, I believe, was to say, sorry, the deal isn't holding. There are beings, intelligences, entities, whatever you want to call them. I don't know what they are, but they're here. They're crossing that barrier, that sacred barrier between the material world and the spirit world. The deal is breaking down. And that deal is what governs the structure of mind in the establishment. So I didn't know all this at the time, but this is what I've come to think about, what my crime was. The senior dean for faculty, not the second dean, not the top dean, was the one that was really after me, I think, but the second dean, when he presented me with a letter informing me that there was a committee that was going to investigate. The investigation went on from June of '94 and ended in August of '95. He said to me, John, you would not have gotten into such trouble if you had not said that this work required that we reconsider our notions of reality. This is his work. If you had said instead that you had discovered a new psychiatric syndrome whose etiology we had not yet established, you would have been okay. But of course, the whole point is that it forces us to rethink our notions of reality. Now, just how deeply our notions of reality are fixed, even though intellectually we may say we're open to the notions of other beings, other realities, is captured in an incident which I tell over and over again in different form, because it relates to the Institute of Noetic Sciences. This has to do with a friend of yours, Fred Alan Wolf, who is known as a physicist who has written about parallel universes and other matters, and wrote the foreword to Amit Goswami's interesting book, The Self-Aware Universe, How Consciousness Creates the Material World. And in this book, in his foreword, he says that the quantum weirdnesses that reveal paradox about reality, he says, all those paradoxes are explainable, understandable, if we could just give up that precious assumption that there's an objective reality, quote, out there independent of consciousness. It says even more that the universe is self-aware, and that it is consciousness itself that creates the physical world. Fine. Now, I presented my work in California at the Institute of Noetic Sciences 2 or 3 years ago. Fred Alan Wolf was in the audience. I presented all these contradictions, paradoxes, ambiguities. I thought that this invited us in terms of reality. At the end of this, the first hand that goes up is, in the audience, Fred Alan Wolf. He says, John, tell us, are these aliens real or are they not real? He said, my God. First I thought he was kidding. And then I thought, okay, if Fred Alan Wolf is asking that question, we really do have some ways to go about the ambiguities, questions, paradoxes about the nature of reality. Okay? So that gave me a kind of interesting insight as to what we're doing. Now, I know I'm bouncing around here, but I can't help it. It's too stimulating. This doesn't hold together yet, or ever. I don't know. I want to return to the tragedy of Reich, because I think that there is the tragedy and yet the glory of Reich, the tragedy for sure. Now, tragedy in the Shakespearean sense, involves a fatal flaw in the character of the person, which makes that person vulnerable to the forces seen and unseen in the society and in the cosmos. It's that interplay that is tragedy. Now, we can ask ourselves, what was the flaw in Reich? I'll try to come back to that in a moment. But I think that's the nature of tragedy. But I'll take at this point, what about the institutions? Now, the institutions, Reich, as you know, managed to offend every possible institution that you could consider. The psychoanalytic establishment, the religious establishment, because I think he was into talking about basically what at an unconscious spiritual level, religious level, are divine energies that we're trying to objectify. The scientific establishment, because he was trying to objectify by methods which were not familiar, certain important realities. He really did successfully, and I think he ended up, it was his way alone. Even in the trial, to be his own lawyer. I went and got the best civil rights lawyers I could get, and who knew about mental health, and who were deeply, knew the whole system, and I had very strong allies, completely different kind of dynamic here. Now, Harvard, I think Harvard did what Harvard should have done, which is it stands for a certain set of values about objectification, about science, about proof, about the material world, and here I am, violating that, and they never found anything wrong really with what I did. It's just that I violated the notion, what would you say, the worldview that dominates in that culture. And so they did what they should have done, and I fought back as best I could. Now, so to return to Reich, and his, I'm wrestling with what is the, what's the source of the tragedy here for Reich? I mean, it's not just his ideas, because the ideas are getting better known. And I think it does have to do with the way he treated institutions, his challenging, his attacking them, his unwillingness to comply, to adapt, to compromise in any way, to be his own lawyer, to go alone. And I also think, though, that there is and I've said this already in a sense, but I also think that this orgone business, and I think maybe this is at the deepest source of it, this orgone business has to do with the divine, okay? I don't mean anybody talks about it that way, but we're talking of these subtle energies, these life energies, we've heard that over and over again, life itself, vitality. He's talking about the other side of the deal, okay, the part that was given over to the church, not really science, that which brings life into being. That's the creative principle of nature. That's what people call God. And he's trying to make it objective. So in a way, he's committing a kind of cosmic crime there, to try to objectify the divine, or to treat it by the methods of science, to bridge that gap between the spiritual and the physical. He doesn't look at it that way, but I think if you look at the incredible, irrational, demonic attack upon him, it may be related to the fact that he is, and this, I'm just throwing this out as a question, he is trucking with the divine in a secular way. And when you do, and the divine is the province of the institutions and their heads. It's not the province of a lone Promethean scientist. And so when you take on the ministers of the divine self-appointed, whether you're Joan of Arc or Reich, you're going to, Joan of Arc alone said she knew her spirit, she knew her saints, she had direct relationship with them. And the church said, what? You claim to know this connection without mediation to the church, and you must burn for this. And for her political alliances, of course, political work, so which applies to Reich as well. Okay, so I think that's the depth of the tragedy. There's something about his Promethean nature taking on the sacred energies in the teeth of the self-appointed priests of those energies. Now, last two things, and I'll stop. First, I think that this work that Reich did raises some questions that we need to be thinking about. We've heard a very, very interesting discussion by Dr. Grad about trying to study the orgone energy objectively. How do we do this? But if we're dealing with elements from the subtle realms, or these energies, divine energies, they're not just electromagnetic, they're related, as he said himself in a private discussion here, to chi, to kundalini, to the sacred energies, the vital energies. How do we study those? Do we study them only objectively? No, we should try to find measures, yes, but don't we also need to legitimize other ways of knowing? Those experience itself, human involvement with this. Somebody tells you every cell in my body is vibrating. This is the deepest thing that's ever happened to me. Prove it. You don't do that. You try, and you do that, but you need to, I think we need to begin to legitimize experience itself, not to try to find as mentally ill every person that has a powerful experience. It doesn't have to fit with our reality. So how do we use ourselves? How do we use consciousness, our whole selves, as a way of knowing? This is something that I and people at Peer are constantly wrestling with. Now, the last thing I want to say involves the question of the Promethean figure who seeks legitimization and diplomacy and to be diplomatic in the culture, which, I mean, I'm always struggling with, you know, particularly because I work with an organization, with peer, with my department at Harvard, with Harvard Medical School, with Harvard University, and Cambridge Hospital. I'm in the establishment still. I'm still there. I fought to stay there. What does that cost? It's something I wrestle with. I can't answer it. Should I have gotten out of Harvard? Well, that's a bully pulpit, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but what have I given up to do that? To what recently I had a conversation with one of the people that was involved, intimately involved in my trial, so to speak. Nothing like Reich's trial, but my own little mini trial. And he has gotten, you know, as being my adversary, has become very involved. John, there's something going on here. You know, you got hooked because after 15 months, you know, interviewing experiences and witnesses and this and that, you can't help but get hooked with this abduction phenomenon. He got really hooked. But he's a mainstream scientist, and he says there's something going on here. I don't know what it is, but we gotta study it. We gotta find a way to know about this. So he's wrestling with this. What's the right way to study it and so forth? Now, then he said something which, you know, obviously will resonate, I think, with you guys in terms of all the levels of this thing. He said, I want to see you redeemed. Now, wait a minute, that's, you know, that's a religious word, right? Redemption, fall from grace. So which church did I fall by? What church? Well, I fell from the grace of the Church of Science, right? Not Christ science, science. So I'm to be redeemed. Well, that sounded pretty good. He wants to redeem me. You know, take me back into the fold, re-embrace me, that cushy feeling of being accepted again in the institution. Wonderful, you know? Not out in the cold like Reich, dying in prison. I'll be back in the bosom of the establishment. I'll feel good. Wait a minute, this is dangerous. Watch out. Then, so I'm not going to answer this dilemma, but, you know, I have to constantly be arguing with my institution. Yeah, yes, okay, I'll write a letter, but I won't do it. You know, okay, I'll change that, but I'll say the aliens are, or someone so reports the aliens are there. I won't say the aliens are really there. And, you know, at what point do I, you know, sell out? You know, where do I lose my effectiveness? So these are issues that, you know, are before us. Now, I'll conclude with a sentence, which actually is in the last sentence of Walter Kendrick's review of Myron Sharaf's biography of Reich, which addresses this exact issue, and has to do with the title of Myron's book, which was great, right? Fury on Earth. That's right, Fury on Earth. Wonderful title for Reich, right? Fury on Earth. Where does it come from? Well, it comes from James Agey's Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. That's where he got it. And here's the quote. Every fury on earth has been absorbed in time. Official acceptance is the one unmistakable symptom that salvation is beaten again, and is the one sure sign of fatal misunderstanding, and is the kiss of Judas. So, this is the dilemma that I'm going to end with. Official acceptance. We all want it. We hunger for it. We want to see our work accepted. And it's the kiss of Judas. How do we live in that compromise? So, thank you.
If you begin to look at these encounters, which look very kind of, you know, material, three-dimensional beings are here, you know, like in Mel Brooks' 2000 Year Life, oh, there's aliens here, you know, I mean, there is it's very concrete, it's very physical, you can touch them, they're there. At the same time, what happens to these individuals when you go deeply into what's occurred, I mean, like Joe was referring to, something happens. If you go through the terror, they transform. They become, as Danny said, very concerned about the earth, related to the earth, and in a very different way, relating to other human beings in a very different way. So what for me, started out as, arguments trying to prove there really are abductions, really true, it's really aliens here, and that, that's what Harvard got after me about. That isn't any longer what was interesting to me. What was interesting to me, yes, it's real, and we can have a philosophical discussion on the ontological status of the phenomenon, sure. But what was more profound was those encounters led to a opening of consciousness to what has been called mystical or primary religious experience or expanded consciousness. We all have our language for this. So it seemed like there was this linkage, but the central point is knowing. How do we know? What are our ways of knowing? How do we use our intuition, our whole selves, holistic knowing, knowing from the heart? That dimension of knowing, which is traditional knowing in almost every culture in the world, the sacred act of knowing. If you read some of the philosophers like Syed Nasser, who's written about this, that sacred knowing has been lost in this culture. So science, it's not that science isn't a sacred way of knowing, but it's a way of knowing that relies very much on a separation from what is being studied from the self that is doing the study. It's not an entering, a co-creative, transformative act, a sacred act of knowing through the whole being. That's not thought to be scientific. That's religious. Well, maybe the common ground is how do we think about knowing? And that's where I think they come together.